Thank you so much for joining But I'm Not Wrong podcast. I'm your host, Gaylle Turner, and I'm going to share today with Hayden Price, a graphic artist and writer from Oshawa, Ontario, whose heart belongs in the ocean. So let's bring him in. Hi, Hayden. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Gaylle. Thank you very much for having me.
So you have to tell me about why your heart belongs in the ocean. Where did that come from?
I personally think the ocean is this vast reservoir of life and experience, that the water that's in the ocean was the same water that the dinosaurs drank, is the same water that we're drinking. And I think that when we fade away from our current existence, we all go back to the ocean in one way or another. And we just, this endless cycle, this endless library of life and energy and moving around this great planet.
Oh, that's very deep, actually. Hayden, in the summer when we talked, you had an idea about there being a dichotomy of loving an artist's work, but hating the artists themselves. And I guess there's all sorts of artists we could be talking about, whether in music or movies. I mean, I sure could think of a few. Did you have somebody particular in mind when you first had that idea?
The one that came to me a few years back when the Ender's Game movie came out, there was a debate over supporting it because of the writer Orson Scott Card, who is a rather rampant homophobe and has donated a great deal of money towards causes and organizations that seek to belittle and disempower, disenfranchise, and remove rights from people, from gay people. And there was a discussion about whether or not, because Ender's Game, the book, and the movie, that none of that content is there. None of that content comes across in the movie or the book. Yet, I think it's fair for some people to wonder, well, I don't want a cent of my money going to this man so it can then be used to hurt somebody else. And there was basically battle lines drawn between, well, you know, it's art. You got to love the art even if you hate the artist. Now, I should say I think hate is a strong word, but I found that a really interesting debate, and I found myself pushing back against this kind of conventional wisdom that, oh, you love the art, you just ignore the artist. I'm not sure that that's true. Yeah. More recently, really recently, there's the Nicki Minaj thing, right? You know, where she really got hauled over a barrel because of her tweet. I mean, she has a huge following. I think almost 23 million followers on Twitter, and I'm not sure she's particularly against the vaccine. I think she's hesitant about it. That's how she came out, that she's hesitant. Now, she's a super smart woman, and she was probably on Twitter just thinking out loud and going off about her whatever cousin, whatever, about whatever thing that he had going on, and he probably just had an STD. I mean, who knows whatever he had going on, but she had and has huge impact with her followers, and of course that raised huge alarm bells with the followers, her followers, and with the White House, you know, who were just like pulling their hair out, going, "Oh, what are you doing?" kind of deal. Because in general, I think people thought that she was probably left-leaning and probably should have been for vaccines, right? And so there was a huge backlash there. So if I may opine on the Nicki Minaj situation for a moment, I think that this is a great example of you can forgive the art and the artist, because I think that Nicki Minaj has not sung about vaccines. I think this was more of an instant of somebody should have known better, right? Like, I think you're right. It was probably a case of somebody thinking out loud, talking out loud, and not expecting it to blow up quite the way it did. You know, so should she have known better? I think so. But I also understand, though, that that there are concerns about the vaccine, and she is more than free to voice them. It does show that you got to be a little bit careful with what you say, not in a censorship sort of way, but just in a method of, you have to understand your impact on other people, and that there is a tendency among people to take the words of an expert in. So Nicki Minaj is an expert in music. She is not an epidemiologist, but there are a lot of people who have a difficult time making that distinction.
Yeah. I remember this is years ago, of course, I loved Sean Connery in his 007 roles. He was not the original Bond, but for a long time, I'm old, right?
When people talk about James Bond, whenever I ask the question, who's your favorite James Bond, Sean Connery is at the top of the list more times than he's not.
Absolutely. But, he was accused by one of his many wives of mental and physical abuse. And then, in Playboy magazine back in, 65, 66 or something, he allegedly told them that, he didn't think that there was anything particularly wrong with batting around his wife or a woman if he felt that she needed it. And then later on, he sort of backtracked on that. And that always colored my view of him. I never really thought of him so highly anymore, for sure. So that colored me. Same as with Glenn Campbell, who apparently had batted around Tanya Tucker when he was dating her. And then, of course, later on, there was all sorts of accolades with him when he was dying, get Alzheimer's before he was dying, and people just loved Glenn Campbell, and I thought, yeah, you beat Tanya Tucker. And I just sort of can't forgive that anymore when something like that happens.
I think that's fair. And I should say I really don't have an answer to this particular conundrum. I would say that with the Sean Connery example, considering the approaches to women at the time and the approaches towards women in the Bond films, I would say that there is a bigger connection there between the art and the artist, and a troubling one at that. Now, this is where we start getting into really complicated things, like what was appropriate back then and all that. Now, frankly, I believe that most intelligent, normal people knew that assault and, physical, well, it's the golden rule, isn't it? If you wouldn't want it done to you, don't do it to somebody else. I think that's a fairly simple rule for humans to internalize, and I'd say that Sean Connery wouldn't want someone beating up on him, basically.
Although he probably would think that he could take it, right?
Yeah, you never know, eh?
Yeah. And then there's Gina Carano. Remember Mandalorian? You must be a follower. You must have been a big fan of The Mandalorian.
Oh, huge fan of. Yeah. Yes, no, that's another one. Yeah, that's another good one.
And I love her character on that show. Loved her character because she was tough. She is tough. What mixed martial artist? She was the face of women's MMA, and now she is totally canceled because of things that she said. And Lucasfilms has completely canceled her from all Disney and future Star Wars media, and I'm not sure she's going to get any kind of jobs in the future in film, and that's too bad because of what she said. That's really a shame because I love her work.
Agreed. I think when it comes to her situation, I tend to agree. I think that Lucasfilm overreacted a bit. On the other hand, I think that they had every right to sign the contract that they did. And be fair, this wasn't she says something troubling and the next day she's removed. This was a situation of she was reportedly warned multiple times, counseled multiple times, told, that you are representing this brand and this company. And I think that as unfortunate as it is, I think that a company does have a right to protect its own image to a certain degree. And I really think she knew the battle zone that she was entering, and I personally think that she figured she was too big to be taken down. And I think she got proven wrong.
Yeah, that's interesting. Any other thoughts of who you were thinking about? Because I've got a couple others.
Sure. Well, my mind went a lot to Michael Jackson. And you know, a great musician, amazing guy, amazing dancer, and seemed like a relatively nice guy. But I can understand. I had a friend that I was discussing this with who said that he stopped buying Jackson's music, not because it wasn't good music, but because he couldn't bear the idea of even a cent of his money going to support the lawyers that were, you know, being paid to, you know, for smear campaigns or to threaten or cajole potential victims. Now, I also believe that we should have a certain degree of faith in the legal system, that we've put our faith in this system, and that unless we're going to change it, we have to assume that the system works at least part of the time. And if he was found innocent, then there should be an assumption of innocence. But I also understand that that's a very touchy subject. But I think there was a good example that I had, which is if you were living next door to, say, a white supremacist, right?
Yeah. Someone
who in their private life was very much into that sort of thing, this kind of, or homophobic, or any of these other untoward, hurtful opinions that hurt other people. Because I think this is where a line has to be drawn. Someone can feel how they want to feel and say what they want to say, and they absolutely should have the freedom to do that, even if I disagree with them. But I have to draw the line when their freedom and autonomy of thought interferes with the rights of other people to live happily and to share in what we believe to be basic human rights. So if your neighbor is one of these people that doesn't believe this, and they invite you over for a barbecue, the theme of the barbecue does not have to be the freak under the sheet. If you go, there is a certain amount of tacit approval that you're offering, and if someone sees you there, in your opinion, do those people have a right to assume that there is a degree of support for that particular mode of thinking, even if, as I said, it's just a barbecue? But is there a presumption of association?
Yeah, complicity.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, for me, speaking just for myself personally, I probably wouldn't go to that barbecue.
Yeah, the guilt by association.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very sticky, and my main thing is I personally believe that everyone should have the right, and I think everyone should think about this. I vehemently disagree with the idea that one should just turn off their brain and don't think about it. Don't let it bother you. Don't think about it. But I also vehemently disagree with the notion that there is a singular approach. I think that everybody should keep this in mind when they're talking about supporting artists and supporting their art. But I also believe that people have every right to make their own decisions, and for that decision not to reflect on them.
Yeah, because if you take those thoughts and you extrapolate them further down the road, that's where the consequences start to kick in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's a personal choice, and when it comes to businesses, I believe that businesses have every right to, as long as the employee is warned, like with the Gina thing.
Yep.
You know, she read her contract. It was explained to her multiple times.
Yeah.
She was told this kind of behavior, and when you are working for a company in the current structure that we have, the relationship between companies and their employees, which if people want to discuss, that is a totally different discussion. But I believe that a company has every right, as long as the employee is aware, to say, this is our standard of behavior, and this is the basic morality we expect you to uphold.
Right.
And then the employee has the choice whether to work for them or not. If she didn't want to work for Disney because Disney wasn't going to let her express these opinions, I would have supported her. I don't support her opinions, but if she decides she doesn't want to work for them, that is well within her right. That's excellent. Mm-hmm. But I think she was trying to have her cake and eat it too.
Yeah, it seemed like that. And it's a shame. So, that what we're going to live with. Now, do you remember the Joaquin Phoenix thing from a few years ago, where he eventually made that mockumentary, I'm Still Here, but he went sort of wacko for a while and said that he was going to retire from acting and he was going to become a rapper. And he was just weird for, he's a weird guy anyways, but he went weird for a year. He went on an interview with David Letterman. He was so committed to this whole thing about that he was becoming a rapper, and everybody was so confused because he was an excellent actor, and nobody could believe he was becoming a rapper. But it sealed the deal for me when he did that interview with Letterman, and then it turned out he was actually making this mockumentary, right? I'm Still Here, and it was a huge sort of a slap in the face to everybody in the entertainment industry that he'd fooled them for over a year, sort of sucking them in. And I guess for me, it turned me off him as a person completely, and I'm not that fond of him, period, anymore.
Yeah, he thought he was a knockoff Sacha Baron Cohen.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
And I think I think that there is something to be said about that. I think that I'm not intimately familiar with that particular situation, but I do recall that there was some concerns over his mental health, and there were concerns over...
there was.
Because, fame does weird things to people, and he's been famous since, Stand By Me. Or no, was it Stand By Me?
Or was that his brother?
Oh.
No, who was it?
You know what? I don't know enough about Joaquin Phoenix. I must preface by saying that I am no expert on Joaquin Phoenix. But I will say I do agree. I think that it certainly wasn't a very nice thing to do to his friends. I also think that there are artists that do try to change direction. I think that being an actor and being a star is extremely stressful. And there are those that genuinely do try to do what he was parodying. And I can understand someone like that finding that to be a troubling indictment of their own personal choice.
Yeah, it was just, it turned me off. Man, he made a lot of enemies, if I recall. So I wonder about forgiveness. Do any of these guys ever get forgived, Hayden?
Well, I think that's a very, very important part of this discussion. Is I think that it's important to take certain statements and certain standpoints as products of their time, as well as expectations of their time. And I really do think that we should give a lot of leeway towards people for changing and for absorbing new information. I personally think one of our biggest problems as a society, especially with the rise of social media, is the fact that we will dig back and find, photos or writings from the 90s or the 80s and hold that up as a proclamation. I certainly wouldn't want to be accused of being the same person I was 10 years ago, let alone further back from that. I know I've certainly said and thought things that I wish I could go back and change. And I think that we need to be more forgiving. And I think we also need to be very careful about setting a rigid moral line. I certainly don't want to come across as supporting any kind of censorship. I do think that we have rather gotten a bit panicked over the idea of canceling and cancel culture. I personally believe that's just the market reacting, but I I do think we need to certainly remember that people are human. People go through tough times. They go through mental illness. And their opinions change.
You're so right.
I know back a few years back, there were a lot of politicians that were suddenly seeing the light on gay marriage, and it turned out that a lot of them had gay family members. And I remember some of the criticism was, oh, well, just because it's happened to you. And I would agree that, yes, it would have been nice if it didn't have to happen to them first, but I think we should be very careful about judging someone based on, and especially judging their art as well based on one or two troubling opinions. You should certainly keep it in mind. Everyone has a right to keep it in mind, but we should be welcoming people in instead of keeping people out. And the best way to change hearts and minds is not to yell and scream, but to try to say, we appreciate you, we hear you, and this is why we think you're mistaken, and here are some better arguments going forward, you know?
Yep, I totally agree. I can't tell you the number of times in my lifetime that I've had to apologize for things that I've said in the heat of the moment, or just because I was really thoughtless. I didn't think before I spoke, and I still catch myself saying something because I just don't think before I speak. And the cancel culture I find particularly horrifying in general, because it's catching kids today. A lot of them don't realize that what they're saying today is going to catch up with them in their future. We've seen that happen with people going for jobs. Suddenly their stuff from high school is catching up with them, and people are stupid in high school. We all were,
Oh, absolutely. I think this is just a growing pain. I think social media is... We humans have a nasty tendency to advance far faster than our monkey brains can keep up with. I think social media is in the same way that the discovery of electricity, this may sound ridiculous, but in the same way that the discovery of electricity and the way in which it was used, or the Industrial Revolution was a fundamental change, titanic shift in human history, and then the internet was the next one after that, the handing off of so much of our society to computers. Social media is, I believe, an immense step in human evolution that, frankly, we are monkeys playing with a Rubik's Cube. We know how to move the bits. We're just not really sure what it is exactly that we're doing with it, and it's just growing pains. And I think especially, the other point I wanted to make was, especially when it comes to artists, speaking as a writer and someone who has worked in film, and I know a lot of artists that I respect and love and disagree with, I think there is something to be said as well for that artists tend to be built a little bit differently, and I think we need to, this is why I was talking about understanding and approaching everyone with a certain, if you want someone to listen to you, expect that you're going to have to approach them in a way that shows some degree of respect and consideration.
Yeah.
Even if they think something or say something horrid, it is far better to try and discuss it than it is to just write them off. And I certainly don't want to come across as suggesting that, if we found out, I don't know, something terrible about Andy Warhol, that all of his paintings should be taken down.
Oh gosh, no.
Or that all Michael Jackson CDs should be tossed in a river or whatnot. I do think that people need to examine it and come up with their own decisions. And that's why, like I said, the only problem I really have is that it's considered an unassailable conventional piece of wisdom that you can hate the artist and love their art. I don't think that's I don't think that that's a truity. I think that that's up to the individual person. And I think what we need to normalize and what we need to push forward is the idea that having these discussions is important.
Yeah.
And far from being disrespectful, are a wonderful opportunity to learn from each other and grow. I mean, having the conversation is what's important, and it's rife in society. I mean, we if I may, forgive me for being on a bit of a run-on here and a bit off topic, but you look at the statue debate, taking down one statue or another. Personally, I believe that it is completely up to the town, the individual, about what it means to them. What I find distressing is that you get people on both sides being aggressive just over the fact that the conversation is happening at all. And that I find troubling, right? Have the conversation about this piece or this piece or this piece, and try to do it without screaming, right? Like, yeah. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, the screaming thing is beyond the pale. I agree.
You know, I agree. I push back on the idea that there is a cancel culture. I do believe that companies, and again, it's just growing pains. I think companies are panicking, right? So Disney and Lucasfilm are remembering the day and age where, you know, you used to have stars that did terrible, terrible things. Well, you know, Harvey Weinstein, some wonderful movies made under under the company that fellow headed up.
We didn't even discuss him. Holy.
Those films are inextricably tied to his very, very, very bad behavior. And that's not fair to the films, their audience, or the people involved. And I can understand why some companies are panicking and overreacting.
Yeah. You know, Hayden, this has been excellent. I'm going to wrap this up with a shout out to our listeners. Let's hear from you. Anyone want to chime in on someone they love to watch on the big screen or listen to on their playlist, but secretly, you know, can't stand as a person themselves? Let us know and why. We won't share your secret, we promise. Well, Hayden, thank you so much for joining me today on But I'm Not Wrong. Let's do this again soon, shall we?
Absolutely. That sounds good to me.
It's been fun. My guest today has been Hayden Price from Ontario. He's a graphic artist and writer who studied history and politics at university before switching into another love, digital cinema, at college. He currently works as a freelance visual effects artist and writer. Thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate it more than you can know. You can follow me through all sorts of social media, and you can find those links on my website, butimnotwrong.com. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me at stillnotwrong@gmail.com. I promise to read everything sent to me. I hope you hit subscribe on this podcast and that you'll be back next week. Stay present and stay kind. Bye-bye.